Well, welcome back to our training. In the trainings before this, we've talked about, how to listen and some different nuts and bolts kind of things. Right now, we're going to shift into the actual conversation that I'm going to have in Connecting Point when somebody steps up and begin to flesh that out. So we'll be doing that via video, but also on this website, you're going to see that we're going to help you put this in your mind, lock it in, because it's a good flow of how things can happen, and it's very, very natural and very comfortable for you. And it's important for you to be comfortable with it because you put other people at ease that you're talking with as well. So I want to talk about the initial interaction. Somebody comes up to Connecting Point. One of the first things I'm going to do is introduce myself. We talked about that in remembering names, but I'm going to introduce myself and I'm going to get Tony's name. And my next question is, so what can I do for you, Tony? How can I help you today? However you want to word that. And if you go back to remembering names, I'm going to be, kind of locking in his name as well, but listening to him so that I can help him. And then after he's done telling me what he needs, it's like, Tony, I'd love to talk to you about that. How about if we have a seat over here, and I'll be glad to help you. So just very natural, normal, but that's something important for you to practice so that you can just flow and be very comfortable and very, just personable with that. Now we want to talk about how and where to sit. It's more comfortable for people to sit across from one another. In some of the situations we have couches, and in Hannibal, again, these are going to be different. At various campuses, it may be sitting on the steps in Hannibal. You're almost side by side, but give people their space if that's the case. And I think we talk about it here in a little bit. If you're at a table like we are and you want to sit next to them, set it at 90. This is a good way to have a conversation, especially with materials that we have. I can turn this material around and I can sit on the same side of the table and read it. And there's something to be said about sitting on the same side of a table. You're not an adversary. You're not a salesman. We've had situations. I just love the city of Hannibal. We met with them to try to figure out how to get this to happen. And instead of them sitting across from the table being adversarial, saying, "Well, you've got to do this and this," they came around to our side of the table psychologically and just said, "So let's work together. Let's figure out how to get this done." So there's something to be said about sitting in this environment as well. If you do sit across, it's not a bad thing. You can still have the material turned upside down to you, but I think I would recommend that you sit a little bit like Tony and I are doing. If you're in the couch area, it's good to sit across from people. If the couch is big enough and the people are smaller, it's okay to sit beside them, but of course give them their space, at least 28 inches I see here. You'll want your knees pointing a little bit in that direction, and that's going to be natural. If I'm having a conversation, I'm not going to be facing straight out. I'm going to be on the couch a little bit facing towards them. So just that almost probably goes without saying. I think this is important. It's really a good idea to mimic their style and how they're sitting. Their body language tells you a little bit about them. If they're more set back, relaxed, leaning, then they're a more laid back person, and I think they want more conversation. But if they're up on the edge of their seat and their legs shaking and stuff, they're just really intense and they want to get down to business. So that's going to tell you that they don't want a lot of fluff. They don't want a lot of talk. They come, they say, "I want to do this." It's like, okay, they expect, let's get that done. One of the things I know that we'll teach that we want to do is after we've taken care of them, we still want to take a little time with them. And, they're going to be telling you in that get to know you time, we're going to talk about that how far that you can go with that. So, a lot of things we've talked about, reading body language, the verbal and nonverbal signs and communication is huge. So it's important to watch people and to mimic them. One thing, like if Tony is a more laid back person and I'm an intense person and I'm boom, boom, the most effective way that I can talk with him is to kind of mimic what's going on with him and his personality and not be overbearing. And the same way, if you're more laid back, which a lot of Connecting Point people aren't, but if you're more laid back and you've got a person that's up and intense, then they want to get down to business and down the road. And so just be aware of that. Sitting back, I think I probably covered some of that in there, so I think we're good with that. Tony's going to talk a little bit about the get to know you time. So we've moved from, hi, my name is, what can I do for you? Well, great, let's have a seat over here. And now we're going to have this little time where we get to know each other. Very important time. So Tony, take it away.
Yeah. Just to add a little bit on what Sonny was just saying, if you kind of think about your body position, you want your heart to engage that person. So if you're just talking like this, you're not really engaged. But I want my heart, which is in front of my chest, and I want it to engage that person. So I want it towards them and give them that involvement. Also think about when you're sitting in a chair, you're not crossing your arms.
Right.
And for me, that's kind of a comfortable position, but that person might interpret it differently than I intend it to be. So just be aware of what's going on while you're sitting.
And that's a little bit the same. If I'm sitting out here, I'm turning a cold shoulder.
Yeah.
And it's just like this. So this is very engaging to do that.
Yeah.
Helps draw them out.
For sure. All right, so getting to know you. The getting to know you time is critical. It's definitely not interrogation. We don't need to know the dirt and all the down in the basement stuff that they're hiding. We don't need to know every detail, where they're from and every address they've ever lived at. We don't need to know that stuff. It's just the general stuff of having a little bit of backstory of who they are. And we want to be able to engage in them and value them. So we're careful as we go on and we conversate that we're not hitting some sore spots as we go on, that the time that we have, that short 15, 20 minutes, that we're making a valuable time. So we're saying the right things and engaging with them. This should be only about 2 or 5 minutes, and it's about them getting to know them. And it's really easy to do because you can get people kind of talk about themselves. Ask them questions about them and personally engage them. Then they're thinking, oh, you actually want to know about me. You're actually interested in me. And that will break down some of those walls. It can be intimidating showing up to Connecting Point, depending on whatever campus. It could be even in person. People come to me, they tend to be a bit more intimidated by me. So I got to make sure I work extra hard at breaking down those walls when we talk, so they know I'm there for them and I'm there to love them and engage with them. It also communicates that you care, which is always an A+. We've talked about that. And it enables you to figure out where they are on their spiritual journey. They could be like, man, right at the beginning or right before there. They could have been on this journey for a while and they kind of fell in a ditch and need some help to get out. Or they could be just trucking along and, man, we got to get this guy Connecting Point, get him involved too because he's going to be awesome. They can be anywhere in that spiritual scale, and during that time we can figure out exactly where they're at. So we get that gauge, but also remember that we're there to answer their question. They're coming to us for a purpose and a reason. We got to make sure that we're there to meet that reason. And then it also gives you kind of baseline of the type of person they are. And we just talked about how we're engaging them in sitting. Sometimes they're more intense, more laid back, maybe nervous. Wherever the case is, we want to get a baseline for the type of person they are and meet them where they're at.
Right. Let me just say, on that baseline, we might see that they're really nervous, and there are some things that we can do to put them at ease and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, we can use calming words, words of value, so they can calm down.
And how fast we talk and soft we speak, and our position in relation to them and stuff like that as well.
Yeah. We need to adjust ourselves to meet their needs.
Yeah.
They don't need to adjust their body language or how they talk to me, our needs, because we're there for them, all right? So here are some questions we can use to engage this person right off the bat. Tell me a little bit about you. What's your story? I mean, that's like an easy one right there. You might have to draw out a little, if you're listening well, you might have to draw out some of those things they're saying. Tell me more about that, those type of things. But it's cool. People are always kind of surprised that somebody else wants to hear what they have to say and that they value their story. And that's awesome. That's an easy one to start with. Maybe they haven't talked about their church history, their church background. So you can ask them, so tell me a little bit about your church background or your church history. The information they share could be huge. I mean, they could have been a Mormon or Jehovah's Witness, or maybe they came from the Methodist Church, which is going to bring different aspects as opposed to where they are right now at the crossing. You can ask them how long they've been coming to the crossing, which is always the important question. Not, it's your first time, how long have you been coming? So you know what their experience has been like. Is it the first experience? Is it the 30th experience? And what brought you to the crossing? It could be a friend, could be a life situation, so you know how to continue to engage them. As we go on, we want to move from getting to know you questions to answering their questions.
I'm gonna just before we jump into that section real quick. The second question down, tell me about your church history. And Tony used the word that I use and need changing in the manual. But tell me a little bit about your church background. That's going to tell me what I'm going to be dealing with in this conversation, and also how I need to handle some of the things. Also in the presentation, I'll be able to say, you know what, you've been a Christian for a long time, so you're going to know a lot, and we can reference back to that. How long have you been coming to the crossing? It's going to tell me what they've seen and not seen, what they might know and not know. And also the next one is, so what brought you to the crossing? That's where I'm going to get to build some ground with you, because I maybe know the name of the persons.
All right, so we're moving from get to know you to answering their questions. And here you might have a couple. It could be a husband and a wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever the case is. Sometimes people ask, what if there's two people? Well, we want to engage both of them. They both have their own story of how they got there. A lot of times, it's really one person made the other person come, so they're there showing up. Sometimes it's a mutual thing, but you want to hear each individual story, because they're going to be in a different place. You're going to engage them differently. You're going to need to reassure them in different ways and have some different interactions. So be aware that there could be two people there that you're talking to. So as we move along and we start answering questions, we're answering both their questions,
right,
and not just one guy. And sometimes it's easier to talk to the person you have the most similar interests in, like you're both like motorcycles or something like that. You got to be aware that you can't just leave it on that one guy. You got to engage both of them, okay? Because they're both valuable.
I think guys will talk to guys a lot and leave the wife out. And sometimes, Tony, if I'm talking to you and your wife is here and you're more dominant, then we're going to engage a lot more. And sometimes I might try to even ask her a question, and you're going to chime in and stuff. And there are times that I feel like we need to draw the other person out a little bit. And, it's just a natural thing that we have to guard against, because we can just really, whether you're domineering or whatever it is, I might just really spend a lot of my time naturally just talking to you. And so we got to make sure that we're getting both of them. We might have to draw one of them out a little bit and say, so what do you think? And, if they try to chime in, let's just keep driving into that one as well.
Yeah, or if the dominant one answers, I would go back to the less dominant one and say, well, would you say it that way? Is that how you describe your experience? So, taking a chance to rephrase the same question, but being very direct to that person.
And make sure during the get to know you time and asking about church background that you get it from both, because we're going to maybe be having two different conversations for sure based on church background. So anyway, moving on.
So as we are moving on, it's not like a real predictable thing. We don't always end up in the same spot. So you need to know the signposts, red flags, whatever the case is as you're going on. So you need to acknowledge those things as you're going on. Well, that's interesting, especially if they're talking about church background. Well, that's interesting. It's been nice just getting to know you. You've kind of gone through that conversation to get to know them. Now you need to really get to the meat of why they're there. Because there's a reason they came there, and it was to ask questions or engage in the very specific detail type things that only you know and you need to answer. And that's why they're coming to you, is to get those answers. So you need to make sure you're transitioning from chatty time into business time and get to what they need to know at that point. Maybe you can end with, small world. All right, that's a small world. Well, anyways, let's get your question and move away from just getting to know them time. So from the conversation closing lines, you'll move on to say, so you want to know about whatever, and you should have already engaged that question at some point. So you want to sign up for Belong class or wherever the case is. It's just easy to kind of end and move on to the next thing. How to answer these questions are going to come later on. Obviously, easy things are small group and Belong class, and we want to get them into those places. But the big questions of baptism or Jesus, we'll talk about that in another video in more detail, because those are the huge questions. And those are nerve-wracking questions, but questions that you can answer,
Yep,
okay?
have no problem answering. Before we jump off of this, I just want to, sometimes the get-to-know-you time, we've talked about the length of conversation should be short, relatively. And it may be a talker that wants to go on and on. These are statements that you can use to take control of that conversation and just say the statement and then move on into, so you wanted to know about small groups.
Yeah.
So you can control, but a lot of times you don't have to do that. And this is just the segue that you use to shift gears from first gear to second gear and get down to business. And they're great. So you need to learn those and know those.
Yeah, and if you've been in small group training or whatever and you learn about over-talkers, you're going to get some. I guarantee you there's going to be somebody who wants to tell you their story for 15 minutes. And you need to kind of look for those natural pauses and breaths, and maybe they give you an option to respond, or your response should be that transition and closing that conversation on, moving on, because you could get trapped if you're not careful. So make sure you're aware of that and be okay with controlling the conversation. Because you need to accomplish the task that you're there for. And you need to be confident and okay, that's okay to do that and move on. And you'll have more time, more opportunities, hopefully in the future, to get to know the rest of that story. So be okay with that. And then after that, you need to look and listen for other next steps and other places to connect. Throughout that conversation, as you're trying to answer the questions and get them to the right places, they're going to bring up things, what do you guys believe about baptism? I see you show that video like every week, and people are getting, what does that mean? Well, we need to send them to a Belong class, and in Belong class, they learn about that. How'd you guys get started here in Kirksville or Quincy or Hannibal or Macomb? Belong class, and you learn that in Belong class. Maybe they're saying, man, I really need to get connected to some people here and study God's Word. Well, obviously, small group is going to be a place we need to get them. Maybe they're just having some struggles, trying to get past some bad relationships or bad decisions in life that they've made, and trying to move past that. Celebrate Recovery is going to be a place we want to plug them into. So you need to be aware of what they're saying, where they're coming from, what they're looking for, so we know where to plug them in and get them there. If they have kids, find out programs they can attend. There may be something they don't know about, maybe a Wednesday program. We have that here in Kirksville. Or maybe they're just not aware of studio. That's just a foreign concept to them. You need to be aware. I got a 16-year-old kid. Well, I need to get that kid in the studio. He needs to hear God's Word and be involved with his peers, learning about who God is. So you need to be looking for that next step to get them involved, get them plugged in, because that's where they want to be. That's why they're there, and that's where a part of the body of Christ is being involved and connected. So be aware of these things. Know how you're holding yourself, where you're sitting, engaging that conversation, controlling that conversation, and getting people connected. A big part of your task at Connecting Point.
Very good.